Good evening. In a moment, the man who had to grapple firsthand with a question that no one in his position has ever had reason to even ask. Could the President of the United States be acting as the agent of a hostile foreign power? Former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe is here, and that is just one stunning headline from the story that he's telling. There are others. They're no less striking. We'll talk at length with him about all of it in just a few minutes. First, though, new in-depth reporting by the New York Times touching on some of the same moments and themes that Mr. McCabe does, and we might add that Robert Mueller is believed to be focusing on. The title is Intimidation, Pressure, and Humiliation Inside Trump's two-year war on the investigations encircling him. What it documents, some of which we're learning about for the first time, could become elements of an obstruction of justice case, that is, if they are not already. Four correspondents from the Times share the byline, one of whom, Mark Mazzetti, joins us now. So, Mark, there's long been this drip about possible attempts at obstruction by the president. The legal red line continues to be debated. What other interpretation is there of your reporting, particularly of the president allegedly asking Matthew Whitaker to get the head of the Southern District to unrecuse himself in the Michael Cohen case?
Well, first to that point, what we reported was that back in November, Trump calls Whitaker and asks whether it's possible to get the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York put back on the case. And this is someone who Trump appointed and Trump perceived as being a possible ally. It at the very least shows Trump was very concerned about that investigation, which of course ensnared Cohen and which has brought Trump's actions regarding hush money payments into direct focus. The question of how to interpret it is one that, a lot of lawyers are going to have some disagreement of opinion. The standard of obstruction is that when it involves the president, it's about someone has to have corrupt intent. They have to intend to shut down an investigation for corrupt or criminal reasons. That is something that, whether Mueller decides or not, it is certainly something that Congress is going to look at, and it looks like Congress is going to wait until Mueller reports to decide whether they're going to go down that path, which could lead to impeachment.
We should point out the president was asked about this today, denied ever having asked Whitaker that. You stand by the reporting?
Yes, certainly.
As far as Matthew Whitaker is concerned, he clearly didn't deliver on the president's desire for the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York to unrecuse himself from the Cohen case. Do you have any idea of what the president was hoping to accomplish there?
It is a little hard to know. At the very least, by posing this as a question, he thought that perhaps this would be one way to contain the damage, to contain an investigation that he seemed to be getting increasingly concerned about. Now, this is not to imply that Jeffrey Berman would have rolled over and done anything the president would want or Matthew Whitaker would have done. But this is, again, into the mindset of how the president views some of these investigations. And this is what we tried to document in this story, that this is something that's of a piece with a pattern of activity over 2 years, how the president has dealt with the investigations, has dealt with the investigators.
You quote Whitaker as telling Department of Justice associates that prosecutors in New York needed some, quote, adult supervision. Do you know what Whitaker meant by that and what, if anything, it led to?
Well, it doesn't appear that Whitaker took direct action to do or intervene in the Southern District case. But another quote we say in the story is that he viewed his job, he told people, in part to jump on a grenade for the president. Now, that is quite a statement for an attorney general, even an acting attorney general, to make. So to be fair, it does not appear that Whitaker directly did intervene in this case, but it gets a little bit at his mindset about some of these U.S. attorneys' offices in the ongoing investigations.
You report that in 2017, one of the president's lawyers reached out to Manafort and Flynn's lawyers about possible pardons. Can you explain what exactly was going on there? Because the president's new attorney general, Bill Barr, said flatly last month in his confirmation hearing that if President Trump pardoned someone in exchange for a promise not to incriminate him, it would be a crime.
Right. This is something that both the New York Times and the Washington Post reported last year, that the president's lawyer, John Dowd, reached out to the attorneys for both Manafort and Flynn that at least suggested the idea that these men could get pardons. Now, this is not to imply there was a direct quid pro quo in exchange for something, not cooperating, they will get a pardon. But raising this issue at a time when both Manafort and Flynn were increasingly under legal scrutiny raises questions about the reason why he did it.
And just lastly about Flynn, you also report about how the president tried to control the narrative about his firing. What did you learn about how that played out, and in particular the role of Sean Spicer?
Right. We reported that the White House counsel's office actually wrote a memo early on in the Trump administration documenting a number of misstatements that Spicer had made on the day after Flynn's firing, specifically overstating just how thoroughly the White House had investigated Flynn's behavior and his activities. This was real concern about how this narrative was getting shaped. And what we report is basically this was the first crisis of the Trump administration. And the first instinct of the president was try to contain the damage, make this go away. As he told others, as Chris Christie put out his new book, he really believed no Flynn, no Russia problem. If we get rid of Flynn, the Russia problem goes away. Here we are 2 years later.
Mark Mazzetti, it's fascinating reporting in the New York Times. Thank you, Mark.
Thank
now,
you.
Andrew McCabe, who ran the FBI after the president fired James Comey. The firing was a highly consequential act. It happened at what, even at the time, seemed to be a deeply troubling moment in history. And that's just how it looked to an outsider. As the man in charge of America's premier crime-fighting and counterintelligence agency, acting director McCabe was no outsider, although his firing has made him one now, and we'll talk about that as well tonight. His new book is titled The Threat: How the FBI Protects America in the Age of Terror and Trump. Andrew McCabe joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let me just ask, first of all, about the reporting that you just heard. Would it surprise you that the President of the United States would try to personally intervene through Whitaker to reinstate somebody he viewed as a political ally to run the Cohen investigation?
Well, let me say it's a remarkable piece of reporting that I've had the opportunity to review just today, as everybody else has. I'd have to say, Anderson, I am to the point in this entire experience where I don't know that I can be surprised any more than I have already been surprised. I wasn't shocked by anything I read in the report. Much of it is consistent with things that I experienced and saw while I was still at the FBI. So it is really a remarkable account of everything that's been going on.
Yeah, I mean,
the FBI has been struggling.
So many of the things that you recount in your book, as I was reading the Times today, I was thinking to things from your book. I mean, just the whole tone and tenor of the White House, of this White House, it would seem to make sense that he would call it Mark Whitaker and try to get this guy reinstated.
Yeah, it does. You know, I think the difference, obviously, is the period of time that I talk about in my book was much earlier, right? It was predominantly the events that took place in May around the firing of Director Comey, and the things that we had perceived through a series of odd interactions with the president that Director Comey had and other things that we had come across during the course of our investigation of Russian meddling in the campaign and the potential Russian involvement with people associated with the Trump campaign. Those were the very concerns that led us to the point to believe we think it's time for us to open an investigation.
If Whitaker truly did say, as the Times is reporting, that his job was to take a grenade for the president, I mean, is that the job of the Attorney General or even the acting Attorney General? I mean, I don't know that I've ever heard of any Attorney General describing his job as that.
I mean, not in my estimation, right? And I've had the privilege of working with and around several attorneys general. I don't know any of them that would have described their role in that way. You
have very choice words, obviously, for when it comes to the president. You call him a threat to both the Bureau and the nation. If the president is, in fact, that dangerous, I mean, as a lifelong public servant, as someone who took an oath to protect the Constitution, didn't you have a duty to come forward before writing a book?
Well, I think there are two kind of different concepts here that are coming together. The first is, what was our obligation as the investigative agency to address the situation in our hands, which was based on the information that we had. We thought that a potential threat to national security might exist. That being that the President of the United States may have attempted to obstruct justice in his efforts to thwart and impede our investigation of Russian influence. And if he had done so, Why? Why would any American president try to stop the FBI from investigating what the Russians might have done to our election? So that's the responsibility that we had at the time. We navigated those incredibly, tumultuous waters in the way that we did. I think we made the best decision at the time with the information we had, and that was to open the case.
Why wait so long, though, to speak out? I mean, you could have, there's people who resign in protest over things like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you're limited in the way that you can speak out while you are an FBI official. I left under adverse circumstances, and in my estimation, the best way to speak out, the best way to present my thoughts about how I think this president is undermining the role of law enforcement, undermining the role of our intelligence infrastructure, and negatively impacting the men and women of the FBI and across the intelligence agencies' ability to protect this country on a daily basis. That's an argument that I felt like I had to make in a thoughtful way in that book.
The things the president says about the FBI, about the intelligence community, you have no doubt that has a negative impact on their ability to do their jobs.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of, I've talked to a lot of, former FBI people who say, look, they're professionals, they put their heads down, they try to just cut out the noise.
That is true. FBI people will continue to do their jobs under any circumstances, in the face of any sort of obstacles. They will continue to go to work and try to protect this nation and uphold the Constitution. But the fact is, when the President of the United States himself personally undermines the approaches and the strategies that we have to rely upon to get this work done, like working with cooperating informants, working with people who are willing to plead guilty in order to and provide information to the government in the course of doing that. When the president and his supporters continually perpetuate this false narrative of corruption within the FBI, that makes their job harder every day.
Well, I mean, one of the stories you recount in the book is that you were told by somebody who was briefing the president about North Korea nuclear capabilities. The president basically pushed back saying, I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that they do have missiles that can reach the United States because Vladimir Putin told me that they didn't. The idea that, I mean, it's one thing to doubt U.S. intelligence, and one should be skeptical. When you heard that the president of the United States would take the word of Vladimir Putin over an intelligence briefer, which is basically what he also said in Helsinki in that press conference about Dan Coates and what Vladimir Putin said. And just what went through your mind?
It's astounding. I mean, it is. I've never heard any principal in the government react to intelligence in that way. This was not healthy skepticism. It wasn't pushing us to be smarter and more accurate and more incisive, all of which are good ways to react to intelligence. This was the kind of the ultimate step in what had been a struggle to get the president and the attorney general and other principals focus on intelligence from the very beginning.
You learned that story secondhand. Can you say who told you that story?
I'm not going to say who told me that story. It was, suffice to say, they were folks that worked for me who were assigned to that role to provide that briefing on that day.
Your book was delayed by the FBI. Your attorney suggested that they were possibly trying to silence you. Is there anything that the FBI censored about President Trump or Russia or any other topic that you think the public needs to know?
No. The process with the FBI was extensive. We took several months to get through a manuscript that normally, according to FBI policy, typically takes about 30 days. I understand that the issues that I talk about are particularly relevant, they're timely, they're national security issues. I think all of those things combine to make it a much more arduous process. Nevertheless, I am very happy with the product that came out of that process, and glad to have the FBI seal of approval on it.
One of the things that is not in the book, which obviously has gotten a lot of attention, is the conversation with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein about the 25th Amendment. This morning you said you didn't put that in the book because you didn't want it to be a distraction. I mean, it's certainly a distraction now. If you didn't want to have it be a distraction, why bring it up at all?
Well, I didn't bring it up, right? It was both that and the comments that Rod made, the Deputy Attorney General made about offering to wear a wire, both things that were shared with the press without my knowledge or consent or involvement. And so now that those things have been discussed publicly, and I've been asked questions about them. I'm, of course, going to answer those questions truthfully. But at the time of writing the book, those things had not come out in the media, and I felt like they're so inflammatory, and I think they've become a distraction to the bigger themes, the more important topics in the book.
I do want to ask, though, I mean, at the time that in the book, that Rosenstein offered to wear a wire to a meeting with the president, and I know you said you consulted with the attorneys at the FBI about that. At that moment, did you think that was a good idea?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
Why?
not. I felt like it was an incredibly invasive and potentially precedent-setting thing to do. I didn't think it was necessary at that point. I mean, if you think about it, the reason you would send someone in with a concealed recording device to tape the utterances and the statements of a subject is to capture evidence of intent. We didn't need to do that in this case. We knew what the president intended. He made, through his own public statements, the statements to Lester Holt in the infamous interview where he talked about thinking about Russia when he fired the director of the FBI. So it was really a risky and controversial position that I did not want to put the agency in.
You talked about in 60 Minutes how you memorialize a number of your interactions with the president and contemporaneous memos, which is something FBI agents are trained to do. You did, some of them were turned over to Mueller or perhaps all of them. Did you document your discussions with Rosenstein about the 25th Amendment and wearing a wire as well?
I documented my interactions with Rod Rosenstein, and those memos have been provided.
So knowing what Rosenstein said about the wire and the 25th Amendment, as well as Rosenstein's role in firing of Comey, do you think Rosenstein should have recused himself from oversight of the Mueller probe?
Well, I don't know. You know, that's something that the Deputy Attorney General has to determine for himself. I can say this: it was an incredible time, and the simple fact that the Deputy Attorney General and the Acting Director of the FBI were trying to figure out how to navigate a situation in which we thought the President of the United States might be involved in obstruction of justice and might be doing that to cover up some sort of inappropriate relationship with the Russians. I mean, it was a head-spinning moment.
Would you have recused yourself if you were in Rod Rosenstein's position?
I was not in Rod's position, and I don't want to answer a hypothetical like that. But I will say that despite all of these conversations, the mention of the 25th Amendment and the offer to wear a wire, all these things that have become so kind of topical in the last few days, I think we've lost sight of the fact that Rod Rosenstein decided to appoint Special Counsel Mueller, and by doing so, I think the entire country owes him a debt of gratitude. Rod did the right thing by putting the right person in charge of that investigation.
With regards to the Mueller probe, to the launch of it, did Rosenstein give Mueller a specific list of people to look into?
I don't know the answer to that. I can't speak to the direction that Rosenstein may have conferred to Director Mueller.
Do you know, was the president's family being looked into either before the appointment of Mueller or after?
That's something I don't feel comfortable talking about as it goes to kind of could go to ongoing investigative matters.
Did you continue to receive updates about the Russia investigation even after Robert Mueller was appointed?
No, we put a process in place to ensure that our investigators, so the FBI personnel on that team, would take their direction from Director Mueller and his staff.
We're going to talk more right after a commercial break, but one of the things I just find incredible in your book is your description of Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General of the United States. Yeah. I mean, for people who haven't read the book, it's stunning what he did not know about the FBI, about the Department of Justice, what he was interested in, what he wasn't interested in. I mean, even you write that Comey early on, started with the basics with him, explaining the differences between, Sunni Islam and Shias.
Yeah, every Attorney General goes through some process of orientation, right, to understanding what the intelligence products are, where they come from, the significance of the authorship and the work behind each product. There is a huge learning curve for an Attorney General to get over, and I think I was able to see Jim Comey try to walk Attorney General Sessions through that process. What became troubling to me is as we went further and further down that road, it was clear that the Attorney General was really focused on things that we did not think were particularly relevant to the threats that we were discussing.
I've got to take a quick break.
Sure.
We're going to have more with Andrew McCabe. Next, we'll talk about another moment in the wake of Director Comey's firing involving Russia and the questions that surround that. We're back with former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, author of the new book, The Threat, How the FBI Protects America in the Age of Terror and Trump. It's his account of a singular moment in American history, one which we are still living through today. Just briefly on Sessions, you had said before the break that what he was focused on often would surprise the professionals at the FBI. It seemed like he was interested in narcotics and of the illegal shipment of narcotics into the United States, and also the national origin of people who had committed crimes, and that seemed to be about it.
You know, those are two big topics for the Attorney General. And certainly the illegal importation of narcotics is something that we're all concerned about, right? And it's an important issue and one that we discuss frequently. It is not always the most important or the most pressing national security matter to discuss. And that's really what those briefings around the president's daily brief are supposed to kind of focus on.
It also seemed like he wasn't reading the president's daily brief.
That was my impression on many occasions, and then of course that was somewhat confirmed to me when I heard from our own folks that the tablet devices that are used to convey the briefing materials were not being opened on a regular basis.
He also said something which, he said something to, I don't want to misquote it, but it was something to the effect of, back in the old days, you could trust the FBI because they were all Irishmen. Now you don't know who these people are with tattoos and nose rings.
He did. It was, a confounding and quite frankly just incredibly awkward thing to say to a room full of people. I don't think any of us knew quite how to react. There's just another comment that we tried to push through.
I want to ask you about something you said about the memo from Rosenstein that he used to justify the firing of Comey. About it, you've said that the president asked Rosenstein on more than one occasion to, quote, put Russia in the memo. What does that mean? What did the president want put in there about Russia or about the president or about the investigation?
I don't know that they ever developed that idea beyond the president's request, because Rod, of course, indicated that he didn't need to refer to Russia in his memo, and then he didn't. He didn't put Russia in the memo. So that's something that it concerned us greatly, but it's one of those facts that we were looking at the time and asking ourselves, what did the president intend with that comment?
It's been reported that an early draft of the memo, though, included the president thanking Comey for telling him he was not a target of the Russia probe.
Yeah, there was an early draft of a letter that the president was relying upon. That's the letter I've referred to in the book, in which that was given to me by the Deputy Attorney General. I'd rather not discuss the actual details of that letter because it could impact the ongoing investigation.
But if the president wanted it, was it Rosenstein defying the president's orders by not putting Russia in the final memo?
It's really hard for me to say, Anderson. I can't sit here and tell you kind of what Rod was thinking or what Rod was intending. I just know that he didn't, in fact, follow that suggestion or order.
You said it wasn't simply the Comey firing that led the FBI to open an investigation into the president. There were concerns whether or not he posed a national security threat, had it, in your words, been building for some time. Are there other things that haven't been made public at this point that the investigation into the president?
I'm not so sure that there are things that haven't been made public, but I think the important thing is to think about, put yourself back in May of 2017 in the position of the investigators, right, the investigative team, and the things that are really standing out for them go back as far as the early fall when we're conducting the investigation. From the very beginning, the president is referring to the investigation and our efforts, at least from the beginning of 2017, as a witch hunt, as a hoax. He's continuously publicly undermining the effort that we're undertaking. So that causes you as an investigator to think, why is the president doing this? Clearly he doesn't like what we're doing. In addition to that, he approaches Director Comey and asks him to drop the case against Mike Flynn, which of course we don't do. And after Director Comey fails to drop that case, he is in fact fired. So it's like a series of building events and facts that ultimately, when the director is fired, the president makes the comment about thinking about Russia when he fired the director. we were in a position to say, this is so clearly an articulable factual basis upon which to believe that a federal crime may have been committed and that a threat to national security exists, we are obligated to open up a case under these circumstances.
Looking back, I mean, the text exchanges between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, you would agree they were inappropriate, would you?
I would say they were inappropriate and incredibly unfortunate.
Did they surprise you?
They did, yeah, they did. I didn't know anything about Pete and Lisa's private communications. I don't think anybody did. They were, you know, by definition, private communications between two people.
If one of the now public texts in one of those texts, Strzok said that he wanted to, quote, believe the path that Page threw out for consideration in Andy's office. There's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Mm-hmm. You've said that you don't recall that meeting. You certainly recall an awful lot of meetings in this book, very specific instances over the course of your 2 decades. I mean, there's some people who are going to say, well, it's kind of convenient you don't recall that meeting that's referred to in this text.
I met with the President of the United States 3 times in the course of a 21-year career, right? Those are the first time I was in the Oval Office to meet with the President was on the night Director Comey was fired. I met with the investigative team handling these cases multiple times a day over the course of, you know, over a year or certainly many months. So I don't recall the specific conversation in which Peter made that reference. Peter has explained what he meant by that reference, and of course, I'll take him at his word. But I think the important thing to remember is that Pete Strzok and Lisa Page were 2 people that served this country well. They made some unfortunate and I think poor decisions in their personal lives, particularly with respect to these communications between the 2 of them, decisions that cast incredible doubt and speculation on the Bureau, something that I'm sure neither of them ever intended to do. The fact is that good people make poor decisions every day. It doesn't completely erase the good service they gave to this country. Not one time in my working with them did I ever see anything that I perceived to be political bias or political influence in the decisions they were making and the work we were doing.
These things, as you remember, were not being discussed and kind of thrown around of how do we stop Donald Trump from becoming president?
Nope, not ever.
We're going to take another break. We'll have more with Andrew McCabe in just a moment. Continuing my conversation right now with former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe about his new book, The Threat. I got to ask you about your firing from the FBI. So the Inspector General found, and I'm quoting, that you lacked candor on 4 separate occasions, basically saying you were lying. Mm-hmm. I know you've taken issue with the report and its conclusions. You've said there are explanations for those inconsistencies, but you can't talk about them because of an ongoing civil case. Don't you owe the public, though, at this point, and readers some sort of explanation if you're asking them to believe you now? Because that is the knock against you that everybody points to and said, look, the Inspector General's office is highly respected.
Yeah, which, that is the knock that's so incredibly frustrating. Anderson, I would like nothing better than to sit down with you right here, take out that report, and walk through every claim, every conclusion, everything that's in there. I have very deep and substantive disagreements with not just the results of the report, but what's not in the report, information that should have been included and brought to the attention of folks making that decision. So unfortunately, I cannot do that because of the outstanding legal matters that I am still facing and the civil suit that we will be bringing in the future.
But I mean, the department, the DOJ, the Inspector General office, by all accounts, and would you agree that it's apolitical, that it's run by career professionals?
I would agree that that's what the Office of Inspector General needs to be. That's, in fact, the sort of oversight that keeps the FBI the sort of place that Americans can believe in every day. My own experience with the IG was not that. That report was not fair, it was not complete, and it was not done in a way that I think is unbiased.
So was it done by different people than would normally do it at that office? Or do you think just in this particular case, are you saying they were conspiring with the White House?
Look, what I know, Anderson, is that The president very publicly demanded a result, and the Office of the Inspector General delivered that result. I know they struggled to do so. Some of the documents that we've been able to review in the last few months clearly indicate that. But the president desired that I be gone before I could be eligible to retire. The Office of the Inspector General rushed to get that done on time.
So
one of the many ways.
Essentially, you're saying that they were doing the president's bidding.
Do I think that there was inappropriate command influence, political influence on the ultimate outcome? Absolutely, I think that.
You talked about a meeting with the Gang of Eight, the group of congressional leaders
Yes.
Who brief on intelligence matters. In this meeting, you informed them that the FBI had opened a case against the president back in May of 2017. Obviously, what's said in those meetings is supposed to stay in those meetings. It's high level of folks. You know, Chuck Schumer was there, McConnell was there. One of the leaders briefed was Devin Nunes, someone who, you know, was exposed for secretly doing the bidding of the White House. Given that, did you have confidence that the information you told them in that room did not immediately get relayed back to the president?
It was my expectation that it would likely be relayed back to the president, partially because of the presence of Devin Nunes. I mean, his interactions at the White House and the impropriety of the information he exchanged at the White House is well known. So as we began that briefing, as we came into the room, and it's a situation that I lay out in the book, you know, I was concerned about being able to keep that information that we were discussing confidential and close hold. And it is my belief that that information got back to the president.
You believe from Nunes?
Well, I don't know exactly how it got there. That's certainly one possibility, but it is my strong belief that the information got to the president.
Does it make sense to you, I mean, in kind of looking at this now from the perspective, just how many people around the president have lied about their contacts with Russia? I mean, just the sheer number of people lying about things having to do with Russia.
It's extraordinary. I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like it. I'm not aware of a single other campaign that's been investigated or looked at for the same curious ties with Russia. And now, as a result of the work that the special counsel has done, and of course all that progress that we're aware of through the public court filings and the information that's been disclosed, I mean, you have a situation where not just one, not just two, but numerous people in and around the president, in and around the campaign, maintained contacts with individuals from Russia, people connected to the Russian intelligence services. You have a number who have been charged, a number who've been already convicted and pled guilty for all kinds of different offenses. I think I saw in reporting, open source reporting today, maybe the New York Times stories documented over 1,100 contacts between people associated with the Trump campaign and the government of Russia. I mean, that is not a situation I have ever seen before, and why so many of those individuals seem to be trying to conceal those contacts is something that we should all be concerned about.
Given all you know, given all you've seen, is President Trump fit to serve?
I don't think that's for me to determine whether or not he's fit to serve. You know, our decision, certainly in the FBI, the issues that we confront is whether or not an investigation should be undertaken. We don't convict people, we don't throw people in jail. We decide when we think we need to investigate. That's the decision I made in those somewhat crazy days in May of 2017, and it's one I stand by.
Is he fit to lead the FBI? Is he fit to be a commander-in-chief?
You know, I think that's something that our political leaders and the country at large will have to decide.
One of the things I've talked to General Michael Hayden about a lot over the last year or two is what he calls the thin veneer of civilization, that we all like to think the institutions are so deeply embedded in bedrock that they are immutable and can't crumble. General Hayden and I've spent some time in Sarajevo during the war. General Hayden did as well. He talks about Sarajevo as an example of a multicultural, real city that in a very short order was brought down to its knees. Do you believe the institutions of democracy in this country are strong enough to withstand what is happening right now?
Well, I think that exactly what you've just mentioned, that is the threat that I talk about in the title of my book. It is that persistent, corrosive effect of the attacks on law enforcement, the attacks on the intelligence community, the assault on our very system of justice, on those institutions that we rely upon every day to continue to maintain this country as a free and fair society. There is no doubt in my mind that the president, through his behavior and his words and his projections on Twitter, is undermining the effectiveness and the strength of those institutions on a daily basis. That's the thing that Americans should be focused on and thinking about right now.
When people say you are the epitome of the deep state, that you are the #1 deep state actor, you've been revealed. How do you push back on that?
I mean, Anderson, I find that so incredibly offensive. And I think that the millions of men and women who serve this country every day in all kinds of roles across the federal government would also find that offensive. People who say things like that aren't thinking about all of the things that this government does to serve this society fairly and consistently every day. The fact is, I, like all the men and women in the FBI, people across government and the military, I did my job. I stood up to the obligations of my office. When we're presented with facts, we made hard decisions, decisions that we knew would be tough on the organization, would be tough on us personally. Look what I've gone through as a result of those decisions. But we did them anyway because we were committed to our responsibilities and serving this country.
Do you still believe the president could be a Russian asset?
I think it's possible. I think that's why we started our investigation, and I'm really anxious to see where Director Mueller concludes that.
Andrew McCabe, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The book is The Threat. A great deal to analyze and discuss with our legal and political team. That is straight ahead. We'll be right back.